Mr Deputy Speaker, I also rise to address this bill. Apologies. Mr Deputy Speaker, I agree that we need better processes both to support public housing tenants, to address inappropriate behaviour and to support overworked police. But I also believe we can do all of this without eroding rights, without threatening privacy and with proper accountability. We can represent and advocate for everyone in our community, for public housing tenants, for their neighbours and for the public servants who work for all of us. And we can do it in a way that does respect everyone's rights and does keep everyone safe. This bill, as drafted, does not achieve that. There are no training standards, there are weak information protections, there's no requirement for officers to show ID, and it doesn't have to be like this. We could make a law here that addresses the problems we face while still protecting everyone. In fact, this bill represents another erosion of rights, of privacy protections and accountability for some of our most vulnerable Territorians. Once again, this government is embedding policing and surveillance into public housing while simultaneously removing safeguards that previously existed. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me take you through what this bill actually does. First of all, it removes all references to public housing safety officers and replaces them with a new category called authorised officers. And under the old system, public housing safety officers had to meet specific integrity requirements. They required specific training. They needed police checks. There was a framework of disqualifying offences. They had obligations under the Youth Justice Act. They operated under a legislated code of conduct. Under this bill, all of that is gone. There are no mandatory training requirements, no mandatory police checks, no disqualifying offences framework, no code of conduct. Think about what that might mean in practice. An authorised officer could turn up at a public housing tenant's door with significant powers to enter their home, issue directions and gather information, and there's no requirement for them to have training in de-escalation, in cultural awareness or even in basic tenancy law. Let me tell you about one of my constituents in Johnston. I'll call her Mary. Mary's a grandmother raising 3 grandchildren in public housing. She's doing her best in difficult circumstances. She asked me what this law might mean. She said, under this law, who can come to my door? What can they do? What are their powers? What kind of training will they have? If I've got a child here who's suffering from a lot of trauma and out of control, what can they do with that? What can they do in that situation? As I said, what training will they have? Will they know about trauma? Will they know about cultural safety? When we make laws here in this chamber, especially laws that we know will impact highly vulnerable people, we need to consider what might happen in every circumstance, not only when everything is going right, but when things might go wrong. So when the new authorised officer comes to Mary, everything may be fine. But with no training, no code of conduct and no requirement to show ID, it may not be. The member for Drysdale talked about the need for early de-escalation and I totally agree. But with no requirements for training in this, how can we trust that in potentially volatile situations, these new officers won't actually make things worse? For example, in Mary's case, if an untrained authorised officer arrives to issue a behaviour direction, they may use a confrontational tone, they may misinterpret a teenager's defensive reaction as aggression, they may escalate the situation unnecessarily, causing fear or distress. They may be working with a teenager with anxiety or PTSD without appropriate trauma-informed and de-escalation skills. They could put the tenant, their family and the officer at risk. They may be called to a house with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tenants who may have cultural norms around privacy, authority or family arrangements. Without cultural awareness, and we heard that there are people from across Australia applying to come and work here, and we welcome people to the Territory, but without appropriate cultural awareness, it would be easy to misinterpret this as non-compliance leading to unjustified directions, conflict or escalation. And Mr Deputy Speaker, none of this leads to community safety, not for the tenant and not for the public servant. But it will be simple to restore the integrity requirements to these positions, to mandate appropriate training, the same training that already exists for the current housing officers, to establish a clear code of conduct, to actually protect the tenants and actually protect the workers. One of the other things this bill does is create a huge information sharing regime between territory housing, community housing providers, authorised officers and police. Sections 35B allow all these agencies to share information about tenants wherever it may assist in providing a service or exercising a power, which is an incredibly broad test. So this covers information about NT housing tenants, recognised occupiers, community housing tenants, and anyone subject to behaviour directions or bans. And Clause 14 removes the existing privacy safeguards that protected personal and health information. The regulations that previously required safeguards for sensitive information are now gone. So let me give you a real example of how this might play out. Say Mary's teenage grandson has been struggling with his mental health. He's been seeing a counsellor through a community service, and under this new system, information about his health struggles could be shared between housing, police and multiple agencies, all without specific consent, and all because it may assist someone in exercising a power. We need to have clear definitions of what that means so we make sure that we're protecting everyone in our community. Information sharing should be allowed when it's necessary and proportionate, and in fact sometimes it's helpful for people to not have to tell their same story over and over again. It's helpful for services working with them. But wherever it may assist is too broad, it's dangerous and it threatens people's privacy. Existing privacy safeguards should be strengthened, not removed. Also, under the existing system, public housing safety officers have to show identification before exercising their power. Under this bill, there's no requirement for them to do that unless they're expressly asked. So if Mary is confused, intimidated or doesn't know her rights, an authorised officer can exercise power over her without having to prove who they are or what authority they have. Authorised officers should be absolutely required to show ID before exercising power. This is basic accountability. The surveillance devices regulations will now allow body-worn video to be used in housing compliance processes for banning notices, for acceptable behaviour agreements and reviewing antisocial behaviour directions. Police surveillance technology is now being embedded in tenancy management, and the issue here is that there is no public guidance on how that footage will be stored, who can access it, how long it's kept or how it will be used. If Mary wants to know what's happened to that video of her, she has no way of finding out. We need clear, publicly accessible guidelines on body-worn video use in housing contexts, including the storage, including the retention, and including the tenant notification. And this bill is the follow-up to the Police Administration Amendment Act that this government rushed through on urgency back in September, and I made my views of that act clear then, and we've heard in this chamber today that many people in the community were highly concerned about that act and what impact it would have on our community. Those concerns remain. Mr Deputy Speaker, if the government genuinely wants to improve safety in public housing, here's what they could do with this bill. First, restore the integrity requirements, mandate training, require police checks, establish a clear code of conduct. These are basic, reasonable safeguards. They exist at the moment, they should continue to exist. Narrow the information sharing provisions. Information sharing, as I said, should be allowed where it's necessary, where it's proportionate, but not wherever there's some broad, vague definition of where it may assist, which is subjective, we heard in our briefing. Existing privacy safeguards should be strengthened, not removed. Absolutely, authorised officers should be required to show ID before they exercise any powers. This should be a basic requirement. We need to make sure that there are clear guidelines on body-worn video use in housing contexts. We need to make sure that people know if there's video of them, they know where it is, they know who can access it, they know what's happening with it. And we also need to make sure there are proper review mechanisms for banning notices and behaviour directions with accessible appeal processes. And Mr Deputy Speaker, if we really want to address the issues with public housing and with community safety, let's invest in actually supporting people, not just policing them. Let's invest in programs that prevent problems before they arise, in early intervention for families, in mental health support, in youth services, in culturally safe and trauma-informed programs. Let's provide tenants with the tools and support that they need to thrive, not just the powers to enforce compliance. Let's work with communities, and we've heard examples of that here in this chamber today, not impose measures that create fear, confusion or distrust. That's how we build genuine safety for everyone. Mr Deputy Speaker, when we debate and vote on laws in this chamber, we need to be doing it for everyone, including people who don't have a voice in this chamber. The Chief Minister said this morning that she listens to people and then comes into this chamber to make law. And that's exactly what I believe our job is. And we need to make sure that we are listening to everyone, not just the loudest voices or those in positions of power. We need to bring into this chamber the voices of people who are often unheard, the people who are directly affected by decisions, yet rarely consulted, and we need to make sure that the laws we pass protect the vulnerable, support the community and respect the dignity of every Territorian, whether a public housing tenant, a police officer, whoever they are. We need to make robust, strong law that achieves its aims and protects everyone. But Mr Deputy Speaker, this bill in fact reduces professional standards. It strips away privacy protections, it embeds surveillance into housing, and it does all of this to people who are already vulnerable. Mr Deputy Speaker, other people in this chamber have talked about the demonising of public housing tenants, and I echo that, and I say to the public housing tenants in my community, I see how hard so many of you work there and are proud of your housing and work to be part of the community and contribute to the community. And I want to say to you that you are absolutely welcome here. That you are also Territorians, that you are also people that we are making law for, that your voices matter and your views matter. And that you deserve privacy, you deserve dignity, you deserve to be treated and seen as citizens just as everyone else, not subjects to surveillance. And that our whole community, every single person, deserves laws that will work for everyone. Mr Deputy Speaker, I do not support this bill as drafted. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Johnson.